A lot of times, if a student is having fingers flying away while they're trying to play the scale, I'll actually have them play it, like for an entire week. I'll have everything they play, they have to have all their fingers touching the string all the time. And this sounds particularly bad when you're playing a first finger, because these three, I actually feel the string tickling the bottom of them. And it makes this muted kind of wolf note sound. Yeah, if you can see, they aren't pushing the string down, but they're touching it. And so that's the first note of the scale. And so it'll go like this. There's B flat, C, D. I leave them all down, move first over. I only move a finger when I need it. That's all fingers down all the time. There's another variation on it. Instead of moving them, I actually don't change the way I would play it. Like normally when I play, I don't start with my fingers on another string. I start with them right above. And so that's this way. That's the way I first started playing. So even on the open D, I'll have them all touch. Open G. In general, when I approach the bass, I use like a pretty traditional Samandal style of hand position. But there are some variations on it that are very particularly useful when you're faced with challenging passages that aren't very idiomatic with that. And it's borrowed a bit from different schools of thought around the world in bass playing. So you have the kind of traditional Samandal position where as you move from one position to the next, the thumb moves with you as almost like a plastic hand up and down the neck. So there's that. Then there's another one where you might cover 2 or 3 positions in a Samandal-like view from the front. Your fingers remain in this kind of equal length of string between 1, 2, and 4. But then you're going to move the thumb in kind of a neutral position between several positions. And this is kind of a well, not quasi, it is a pivot. But the only difference is I'm maintaining a Samandal position on top of it. So my thumb might be behind my first, it might be behind my second, or it might be behind my fourth. And I can easily access all these positions off the thumb. Sometimes this is particularly useful if you have to go back and forth between 2 positions very quickly. Like let's say from an E flat to an F sharp. If you had to do an E flat to an F sharp back and forth very quickly, you could leave the thumb in place. But from the front, it actually looks like I'm shifting. It's a nice little illusion. So there's that. Then on top of that, there's a third technique in which you're actually going to open your hand up and either use 1, 2, and 4 or 1, 3, and 4. I don't actually ever use 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm actually adding a half step to the hand. I never use this position I'm demonstrating right now because if you look at the back of my hand, there's tendons sticking out and it looks incredibly uncomfortable. So what I'll do is I'll relax part of my hand, like at least one of the fingers has to be relaxed. I'll use 1, 3, 4 or 1, 2, 4. And I'll kind of stack the hand that way. In general, I try not to hold them in this position because it can get pretty awkward very quickly. So I've talked about Samandal, a Samandal combined with a pivot, and then an open hand position. Some people call it extended, but that denotes exactly the sensation I'm trying to avoid while doing it. I don't want to extend, I just want to open my hand up. So I prefer to call it that. 4-finger technique is sometimes used. And then this a lot of times is used in passages that could also be played like this with the thumb. In any part of the bass, you could throw the thumb back. It's a little bit easier of a technique if you play sitting. I prefer to play standing, so I tend to do this more. But it's a nice transition to go up into this part of the neck. Now, transitioning between a Samandal, an open position, or any other like lower position type hand shape to the thumb position, there's this nebulous area right here. And Jeff Braditich advocates using the 3rd finger as soon as you can when you're heading up to thumb position. And I agree with that. And I think in general he advocates it in this part of the bass. The only time I prefer not to do it is if I'm not going up to thumb position, I will still use 4. I won't start using my 3rd because I don't want to be going back and forth if I don't have to. If I'm doing an open hand position here, I probably will use third. So it's kind of a, if you're going there or you're coming, pretty much I shape the hand based on where I'm going. If I'm going to thumb position, I'm going to start incorporating the third sooner. If I'm going to an open position, I probably will consider it. If I'm just staying down here and doing more of a Samandal type way of approaching the bass, I'm probably going to keep fourth in this part of the neck. This last little bit is kind of an intellectual thing. It's the way I visualize the fingerboard of the bass in my mind, and the way I number the positions in kind of a traditional Samandal style. It came about from me having to read cello parts in a string quartet at pitch, and I was not really educated at that point to be comfortable up there, and so I did kind of a little mental game where I just pretended that my half string harmonic was my open string. So there's your open string, and then half position is just right above that. And so what I would do is in thumb position I just cut off my fourth finger and replace it with the third, but in essence I would treat the positions exactly the same. So half position, here's your half string harmonic, a half step above that is half position, a whole step above it is first, above that 2. Or 1.5, depending on the numbering system. There's all sorts of questions about that. Basically, you can take anything you're going to play down here in this part of the neck, and you can play it with exactly the same fingering up here. And that's kind of what I did. I even would go across to the C, which is, for a 5-string tune, the way I tune mine, it worked out very well for sight-reading cello parts, because in thumb position I had basically the range minus a note that they did in their open strings, and I could just set it down and read it in my basic kind of Samandal hand positions, equal length of string between each finger, measure my shifts the same way, put them in the same place I would down here, but just exactly up an octave. And the same thing can be done up another octave. And the only difference here is sometimes fitting 3 fingers, if your fingers are as fat as mine, becomes a chore. So sometimes I'll let the second finger play the role of 2 fingers and do a little sliding back and forth. But up here, I don't play up there that much, as you can tell by all the rosin. But when I do, I try to employ that little mind trick to make the bass seem smaller. Kind of like a piano where you have 1 octave and the next octave is exactly identical. It uses the same fingerings, all the notes are kind of in the same place, they're just half as far apart. That's the only difference from the piano, is the notes are twice as close together. And then as you go up again, you have exactly the same thing in the final octave, and the notes are half as far apart again. So they, in some ways, it actually made it seem like this octave was easier than this one, because here the notes are so far apart, I had to travel a mile to get to them. But when I jumped up an octave, they became so much closer together, it actually made it easier for me to think of this part of the bass geographically. Well, I hope that some of these ideas really aren't the way of playing. It's just the way that I've kind of come to think about the way I play. Each person's going to be a little different, so you're going to have to discover all these things that I've discovered for me. You're going to have to discover them for you, and you're going to combine all the different things you hear from different people, the things you see in their playing that you admire. You're going to borrow it, and eventually you're going to be a universal plagiarist for everyone you love. And you're just going to take what's good about them and incorporate it in your own playing and then the way you think about the bass. And so hopefully some of these ideas you'll say, yeah, I could use that. And that's, if so, then I'm completely delighted that this is out there. And if you ever have questions, I hope you'll hunt me down and find me and ask me the question, because a lot of this stuff, I really love talking about it. And I enjoy working with people to try to fix these things if they're having trouble with them. Nothing gets me going more than that. You know where to find me through Jason's site, or I work at Lyric in Grant Park, and I teach at Roosevelt, so that's where you can find me.